Uh, Welcome everybody, uh, and thank you so much for coming today. I am Alejandro Delgado. I am a member of the Mining Department Seminar Committee. The committee organizes the seminar series and invites speakers to come and address students, faculty, and interested industry professionals on a variety of mining-related topics. Since we are today on Zoom, I would like to request that everyone keep their microphones muted during their presentation and unmute them only to ask questions during our Q&A sessions to help everything run as smoothly as possible. Just as a reminder to everyone, we'll be recording this session, so you will be able to view it on the department YouTube channel after the seminar has concluded. About our speaker today, Mr. Douglas Silver. He has had a wide-ranging development career, having worked as an explorationist on acquisition teams, helping and heading investor relations programs, founding a large royalty company, founding the Denver Gold Group, which is the world's largest precious metals investor conference, and ultimately becoming chairman of public companies. Mr. Silver helped build Orion Resources Partners into the world's largest mining PE firm. In 2018, Douglas was inducted into the National Mining Hall of Fame. He retired in 2020, but still gives keynote speeches, lectures, and writes about contemporary issues. Mr. Silver will be talking to us about how today's social changes will impact your life, business, and career. We are very honored to have him here in our seminar. I would like to welcome Mr. Douglas Silver. Thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm always humble when somebody wants to listen to me. So listen, folks, let's be upfront about this. I'm going to be talking about social issues, which are probably the most divisive part of American society right now. So I'll tell you right now, I'm going to step over the line. I guarantee you I'll offend somebody because apparently people are offended over nothing and everything these days. But hopefully you'll learn from this as well. If I can get my next slide. There, whoops. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a lot of different things in a short amount of time, some of which may not be politically correct, but as students, your job is to listen and learn. And I would ask that you don't judge me, but if you disagree with me, make your case. We get in the Q&A, challenge me. I always encourage debate, as people know who hang out with me. That's all we ever do, we just debate. So first of all, I'm a scientist, and I believe other scientists, unless shown factual information to the contrary. This is a concept that's no longer in public society, but I wanted to lay that out at the front. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, you know I do a lot of my own research because somebody's got to start fact-checking this world. You know, my original degree was in zoology, and it forms all the basis for my social views. I believe in the laws of nature. Human behavior mimics other species' behaviors, and nature guides us in understanding human behavior while also exposing its foibles. And I specialize in exposing foibles, so you should enjoy that part of this talk. So let's talk about the laws of nature. First of all, nature is holistic. Everything is connected. And for those of you who heard me speak in the last 2 years, I keep harping on this point. I find it really interesting because, you know, the indigenous people have been making this case for centuries, and we've been ignoring them. And as science progresses, we're learning that they were more right than we were. And hopefully this is one of the reasons that society is changing, is trying to adapt. So in nature, there's this fight or flight reaction. You fight for food and territory. And if you can't protect yourself, you flee. Those are your two options. Another natural law is live within your means, or in the case of animals, within your habitat. And if the land can't support you, you either have to move or you will die. It's very simple. One of the interesting things about animal behavior is that anything that's different is considered a threat. And it's obviously a threat because you don't know what it is and you don't know what it means to to you personally or for your personal security. So change is often perceived as dangerous unless it's proven otherwise. And this is a really important point I'm going to stress in this because I happen to have lived a life where change is good. I've made many changes in my career, and it's always been for my own betterment. So in nature, change is considered dangerous. In human society, it should be considered a positive. So I'm going to talk about ESG. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, ESG's been around since the 1960s. It used to be called corporate social responsibility. And then for a while, it was called the triple bottom line. You know, the bottom line on a financial income statement is your profit. And the double bottom line is after taxes. And the triple bottom line is after you spend money on social programs and do things that aren't necessarily going to make you a dollar, but make the environment or the society a better place. Since then, ESG has changed dramatically in terms of its various abbreviations. And in 2005, ESG as we know it today was established, and it stands for environment, social, and governance. The bottom line is ESG is your social license to operate. And I will make the point that I spend a lot of time working in ESG. I have a lot of experience in it. And none of it is really new. It's really doing two things. One is it's codifying. It's actually establishing the rules for what's expected of you. And the second is it's now become mainstream in the institutional investor community. So now they actually judge you and measure you by various metrics as to whether or not you're cooperating. Somebody's not on mute.
Toyota said they would give 29 to 32 for it.
Somebody's not on mute. All right. So ESG is the business ecosystem framework, and it's become a major issue to investors. So let's go through each one, and let me talk about it from a societal point of view, and then I'm going to show you how it's impacting mining. So sorry to tell you this, but the fundamental problem on this planet is the human population. There's simply too many of us. And Homo sapiens, which is our species name, genus species name, we think we're better than other animals. Agriculture is actually really bad for the climate. Might be good for your belly, but it's bad for the climate. You should also be aware that all wars are fought over natural resources. And this includes labor as a form of natural resource. Food depletion and distribution challenges, including water, are increasing because our population is so large. And all of these factors are interplaying with each other. And that's what's creating this social dialogue that's come so front and center in the last couple of years. Here's a nice little graph of the world's population just to show you how fast it's growing. I mean, it's effectively growing exponentially. And even though 35 years ago, China went to a one-child policy and they have the most people in the world, the rest of the world is playing catch up. And there's just simply too many humans on this planet. So are Homo sapiens better than animals? Well, let's look at this factually. We can't fly or breathe underwater. So that would mean birds and fish are better than us. We aren't poisonous. We don't have spines. We're one of the slowest animals, especially me. And apparently we don't taste too good either. So these are all reasons why it's amazing that humans think they're so much better. So why? Well, we believe that humans are the only species that can think. And also, of course, that we can manipulate objects like no other species. Well, anybody who's ever had a pet knows that your pet thinks. Mine happens to be a master manipulator. He gets whatever he wants and he knows how to manipulate me. So they do think. There was a famous study done years ago where there was a class in animal behavior. And at the beginning of the semester, the professor brought out this fish tank and he had 3 food feeders on it, one in red, one yellow, and one blue. And the class started and he was trying to teach the kids about how you train animals and how animal behavior works. And he put a bunch of goldfish in there. Now, we all know that goldfish are the world's dumbest animals because we're the smartest. And they taught these goldfish how to go to the blue feeder. And so all the fish learned how to do it. At the end of the semester, the students went on to their next semester. The professor put the fish back in the general fish tank. And then the following year, he had to teach the course again. So he set the tanks up through the goldfish, and they all waited by the blue feeder. So if you don't think animals can think and can be conditioned, you're just flat wrong. And even fish, which are considered to have a fairly primitive brain, they can think. And this is one of the issues that humans need to do. We have an arrogance about us and a false sense of superiority towards the animal kingdom. And this is creating a major factor in today's environmental problems. And I'll go into this a little bit more. So the bottom line, though, is humans don't like to share the planet. I know when I lived in suburban Denver, if somebody had a squirrel in their yard, they'd call an exterminator because they want to share their yard with an exterminator. One of the dumbest things I've ever seen. But the point is, humans are very selfish about the planet, and we don't share it. So let's talk about agriculture. Agriculture's been around for 7,000 or 10,000 years ago. There was a Dr. Rudiman who wrote an amazing book about it, where he showed the impact of agriculture started to affect the climate with the invention of agriculture 6,000 years ago. And the reason is that when you remove the green forest and replace it with dry lands, you change the ground reflectivity. Also, surface clearing obviously destroys habitats. We've seen this extensively in the Amazon. Where are these displaced species supposed to go? You know, there's almost like a NIMBY type attitude about species. Well, they'll find somewhere else to go. Well, if you keep destroying their habitats, they have nowhere else to go. Single crops, they've proven in science that single crops create barriers for movements. Some animals are not comfortable going across an open field. They prefer to stay in the forest. So when you wipe out their forests, they can't move. And they've also shown studies that most of the historical work in biogeography has underestimated the size of the average animal habitat. Farming is a huge drain on water. And the addition of pesticides, when I was a kid, the big one was DDT that was killing birds by weakening the shells of their chicks. And we also use all sorts of things to kill every insect you can imagine, many of which are needed for pollinating plants. And finally, now we have genetically modified crops to enhance production. Well, why is that? Well, it's because the existing production can't support the population, and they're hoping to be more productive. Are GMC crops, are they safe? I don't know, but it's an interesting concept. So which industries use the most water? Fruit and vegetable farming, particularly almonds, are the worst in terms of how much water they use given the value. After that, it's garment and textiles, and then meat production. I don't think people understand how expensive the water consumption is of beef. Beverage manufacturing, well, obviously, for making beer, you need water. And then automotive manufacturing. Mining is not on the top 5 lists, although we do provide supplies to a number of these industries, which is really interesting because, you know, right now in Chile, they're looking at changing their constitution, and everybody's blaming the miners for using up all the water. But we don't hear too many people ever complaining about agriculture being the problem. And the reason is because people eat food. They don't directly eat copper. Here's by food source. And it looks like for bovine, which is, you know, cows, 15,000 liters per kilogram of food you're creating. That is a huge amount of water for very little product. And then, you know, okay, we got to throw in cow flatulation as another climate problem. I mean, there's 2 good reasons not to be eating cows. But as you go down, you can see that all of the different crops here and the different forms of food consume a great deal of water. And part of that is because many of them cover such big areas that need to be irrigated. And a lot of that water is wasted because it goes to evaporation or runs off. So the E on environmental, where society is taking us is they want us to be more conscious of the environment. And there's been a lot of emphasis lately in our personal impact on it. We need to make better efforts to be sensitive to threatened endangered species. From my research, what I'm finding is it's not that we're not sensitive, it's just we never truly understood how devastating some of our decisions have been on these species. And we've learned a great deal in the last 50 years about the nature of habitat and why you shouldn't be destroying it. And obviously everything on this planet uses water. So if you can use less water, you're a better person. Now, from a mining standpoint, I don't see that as a big impact. Most of the mines that I've been involved with are very, very good at recycling water and are not wasting it the way they say they wasted it in the 1880s. And then, of course, the next one is releasing less emissions. One of the areas that is not getting a lot of attention yet, but it's coming, is your personal footprint. You know, the activists all want to beat up on the companies because the companies make a lot of money. But how many activists are going after the individual? You don't really see them doing that. You don't see them holding people accountable for their water use or for how often they don't use mass transit, for instance, or how they're wasting electricity by not wearing sweaters in the winter. The personal issue of ESG, I think, is going to be the next big push once they've got the corporations sort of plateauing out in their activities. But all of this stuff needs new technology. And one of the biggest areas that needs new technology is in CO2 sequestration. And I had the privilege of having lunch last week with a senior executive in the coal business. And I asked him, I said, why aren't you guys getting with the program? And he said, you know, over the last 30 years, we have reduced the various NOx and SOx and all the other emissions by 95%. But CO2 is still a problem. People are working on technologies. Well, you know what? Technologies, developing new ones, takes fresh thought, young thought, and it needs a lot of technology help. If the coal people could get a handle on CO2, I don't think they'd be considered a dirty industry anymore. But all of these changes, I mean, they sound bad. Oh, you know, too much CO2. Yeah, but engineers and scientists, and engineers are scientists, but I mean, engineers and scientists need to develop new technologies. And that's what universities are there for, is to give you the training to start thinking about these things and get passionate about doing it. Let's go on to social. I started making a list of all the major social issues. And I mean, it kind of started with the Black Lives Matter movement a couple of years ago. Indigenous people, if you've been in mining, Indigenous people issues have been around as long as you've been in business. Diversity and discrimination have taken a front seat these days. And it doesn't matter whether it's gender, racial, cultural, religious, or social nationalism. All of these issues are very much at the forefront of the media and discussion. And I found out they call it wokeness. So because I'm hip, I had to include that in my presentation, although I have no idea whether it's a verb or a noun. So today we live in this tribal society. We live very much like the way wolf packs or lion's pride is, where we want everything our way. We want everything to be done the way we've always done it. And we don't want to change because, at least in the US, if somebody forces you to change, now you're a victim. So this sort of tribal victim society issue is what is destroying the fabric of America. And I know that, you know, we're in the US, but what happens in the United States will go to other countries as well. So we're very much a bellwether of where global politics will go. So what triggers social change? Well, everyone is perceived as either a predator or prey. And predators are at the top of the food chain. And by definition, since it's a bit of a pyramid, there's fewer of them, but they're richer. You know, if they're an animal, they're richer. They have a larger area that they get to selectively eat all the food in. If you're human and you're in corporations, you know, the richest ones would be considered the predators. And you often listen to the way that the news people talk about big corporations, how they're gouging the little man, how they're stealing from the little man. It's very much part of their rhetoric that they give out. But the bottom line is the human society is a pyramid with the rich at the top and the poor at the bottom. And it's exactly the same way predator-prey relationships work. So what's happened is, you know, you get cumulative resentment from the prey. There's a huge wealth disparity, particularly in the United States and in Russia. Job disparity, the whole issue. I can't believe after 40 years in this business, we still have glass ceiling issues. Why is that? Why do we prevent women from moving up the food chain? Well, one reason is because there's not a lot of women to begin with in the mining business. But the other is just, it makes no sense. There's no reason why the gender of a human being should dictate whether they can be in charge or not. But I guarantee you there's a lot of men out there who don't want women to be competing with them. Police brutality has been front and center, and blatant discrimination. And then the last piece, which has always been around, is imperialism. And we don't use that word very much, particularly as it relates to the US. But there's a number of things the US is doing internationally that is blatant imperialism, where we're basically going into other countries and telling them how to behave. And we're doing it obviously for our own benefit. So what happens is you have all of these different things going on simultaneously. But if enough people don't like it and want to see change, then strength in numbers kicks in. And, this is the same way a herd protects itself from a predator. If you have a herd of gazelles and there's one lion, they will stay together to make it harder for the lion to pick out one of them. And again, I think this is what we're seeing in society. We're seeing a lot of different groups all assembling at the same time and protesting, because I spent a lot of time wondering, why now? Why today? Why weren't they doing this 20 years ago or 40 years now? What is different from those days that allows this to happen today? And the other thing too is the youth of the world, you students, you have quite a different view of the world from us older and more mature people. And I'm not saying that we're right or you're wrong. It's just that you have quite a different change. I have 2 children that are in their 30s, and it's fascinating to talk to them about anything related to society or politics or what have you, because their attitudes are so different from mine. But, they always say the children of the future. Their attitudes reflect where society is going. My attitudes reflect where society came from. So social changes, and this is a really important point. When you get social change, it reflects society's evolution. And you can't fight it because the numbers just are outweighing you. And I see many of my colleagues who try to fight these changes. And what they don't understand is that when society decides something is going to change and it puts it into effect, you can't fight it. You need to learn, you need to adapt and accept, or you're going to suffer the consequences. And I really am pleased, and I'll talk a little bit about stakeholder capitalism in a second, but I've been really pleased that some of the largest corporations and governments in the world and activists have gotten together and have now made it acceptable for the societal change. So we don't have this continual pushback by industry against what society dictates they want out of the world. So let's talk about the role of the internet. The internet has accelerated the distribution of information, both real and unreal. But what's happened is there's so many cable channel TVs now, there's so many different sources of information, that the way that the person protects their advertising base, the way they make their money is with their advertising base, is by proselytizing rather than reporting. They have a group of people, their tribe, who believes in what they say, and then they continually feed that tribe more of the same. The other part about it is that the news cycle is shortened. It used to be days to week, and now it's minutes to hours. And there's very little time available for fact checking. And so what happens is if you have a lack of fact checking, it benefits those people putting out disinformation, because tomorrow there's a whole new cycle and they can start putting out whatever garbage they want. And people have a hard time telling whether it's right or wrong because nobody's fact checking and holding anybody accountable. So what happens is people's predilections become their reality, and people will tend to believe that which gives them the most security. And this often reflects their parents' viewpoints, because they're raised in a house, they're basically indoctrinated into their parents' politics. So why is this important? Well, if you're from the deep South and you've had a long hatred of blacks because you're white, and your parents didn't like blacks and your great-grandparents didn't like blacks, you have a predilection not to like blacks. And so when equality comes up, you tend to take the position that everybody's wrong because I don't like blacks. And it's morally wrong, but you have to understand that that was the environment they were brought up in. I'll give you, again, I'm going to keep bouncing back to zoology because I think it really helps. You get an animal that goes into a new habitat for some reason. and he's got to figure out what to eat. Well, he'll probably starve the first couple of days because he doesn't see the stuff he traditionally eats. And then eventually he'll have to try something. And if he likes it, then he'll eat more of that. We have the same thing going on in society where people don't want to change. They have their preformed ideas. But if the message of change is pushed upon them long enough, and particularly if there's lawsuits and people go to jail, they will eventually change, because if they don't adapt, they're going to be left behind. So the role of the internet is playing a huge role in why we're seeing these changes. I mean, the interesting thing about it, set my slide more advanced. There we go. The interesting thing about it is that one of the things the internet has done really well is it's connected strangers. So you take a planet of people with the same ideas, but they don't know each other. Now there's a mechanism where they can find each other. And that goes to the whole argument of strength in numbers. And strength in numbers forces society to change. So I want to give you an interesting example. Back in the day, back when I started in the business in the 1980s, in those days, when you wanted to get a permit to build a mine, you started at the federal level. And then the federal level would dictate to the state, and then the state would tell the local stakeholders what to do. And I remember very clearly when I was 24, 25, hearing the bosses say, those people in the village or in the local community, they'll be lucky they get jobs and taxes. Well, that's changed now. Society has completely reversed this, partly because of the fact of the internet, where now you start at the local level, you engage them, then they go with you to the state. And so when the state goes to the feds for permission, they have a much stronger case and much more support backing them up. This is a major change, but it's a good change and it makes a lot of sense. And the interesting thing is that by flipping this way, the little guy has now been empowered. So what does that mean? I'm not talking about a bunch of short people. I'm talking about indigenous people. I'm talking about Black Lives Matter. The disenfranchised small groups that didn't have the power before now have the power. So if you're not willing to work with the local stakeholders, the only thing you're doing is hurting yourself. It's that simple. So here's the impact. All of these different groups are simply, it's the rise of the disenfranchised, and they're using the internet as the platform for their voices. This in turn connects strangers and accelerates the speed of change. And this is what I spend a lot of time thinking about, is change is always going on, you know that. But the speed of these new issues, it just seems to me it's going a lot faster than it used to. And I will credit the internet as the catalyst for doing that. So as a miner or anybody in the mining business, you need to be knowledgeable about these issues. You need to be more sensitive to these changes and, again, ready to adapt, embrace, and support them. Because if you don't, it's going to be used against you. And you don't want it to be used against you. We all know it's so hard to make money in the mining industry, but if you have people that are fighting you, it's even harder. So I'm not saying you all get on the bandwagon and become bleeding heart liberals, but you need to think about these things and accommodate these in your business planning and running of your corporations. And again, I raised the question, why are there so few women in mining relative to men? It's not because of the schools. The schools take as many women as they can. Why aren't there more women? Some of it reflects these changes. So here's the other thing. Prospecting geologists, which is where I started my career. Nowadays, the prospecting geologist is the first goodwill ambassador for that corporation on a piece of land. When I was a kid, back in the day, we were just transient rock breakers. I mean, we'd go knock on a rancher's door saying, hey, can we prospect on your property? And you'd say, yeah, and then you'd move on. But now, because of the way this thing is flipped, these guys are like your Marines, first ones on the beach. And the question is, are they getting proper training in how to manage the local stakeholder? I think we're probably getting better at it, but I know I didn't get trained, and I know that for 20 years after I started the business, no geologist was getting trained in social matters. His job was to go get hot assays. So this is, again, how society is changing it. And so corporations need to employ training programs to teach geologists more than how to just break rocks. So social, you have to listen and you have to respect the local stakeholders and work with them for mutually agreeable solutions. And if you don't, running a company, what you're going to get is you're going to get opposing forces that could delay development of your project. You know, in the United States, for about $5,000 or $10,000, you can stop a $500 million project for 15 years. It makes business sense to figure out a way to work with local stakeholders at the very beginning, not at the very end. They'll support you. You can go provincial or state, and then that strengthens your arguments when you go to the feds. Now, here's another piece, and I realized I put this piece in here and then realized I was talking to an academic institution. But in my career, I've seen a lot of times where people with academic training think they know everything, and that the local people don't know anything. The fact of the matter is the local people have a lot of resident empirical knowledge. Now, they may not apply it correctly, or they may not understand the academic theory behind what they're telling you, but they have a lot of really good experience that you can use. And so when you go into these places, you know, you can say, oh, I'm highly trained, but you can always learn a lot from the locals. And again, I think this is something that's been missing in the mining industry, is we just assume that because they don't have the fancy degrees or work for the big companies, that they don't know as much as we do. In fact, they know a lot more about that local area. So you need to use that, take advantage of it, learn from them, probably save you money down the road. And, you know, I don't really understand why a lot of these social issues are as bad as they are, because, you know, do unto others, you want them to do unto you. Isn't that how everybody lives their lives? Are there really people that say, I can be mean to everybody, but I want everybody to treat me nicely? It's not common sense, but it's very prevalent in the US these days. So let's go to governance. Now, governance is the third piece of the ESG. And right now there's two forms of capitalism. There's what's called shareholder capitalism. And this was great. Milton Friedman, who was a very well-known economist, in 1970 wrote, "The business of business is business. The interest of shareholders above all other interests. It's not the role of business to support social programs on behalf of its shareholders. Let investors decide which social programs they want to support." I mean, anybody listening to this call think that's still a good idea? It's at the time, that's how in the 1970s companies were run. But companies have now learned and are being forced to learn that ESG is a positive power for making profits. And it's a good thing to engage these and embrace these changes. It'll actually make you more money. And the other one, of course, is state capitalism, which would be basically the way communist countries run. The government controls the distribution of resources and opportunities, and it can intervene whenever it wants. Now, for those of you who heard my SME speech last year, I talked about stakeholder capitalism. And I'm going to read this because I really think that Klaus Schwab has done a marvelous job in capturing what the whole social movement is about. He says, we can't continue with an economic system driven by selfish values, such as short-term profit maximization, the avoidance of tax and regulation, or the externalizing of environmental harm. Instead, we need a society, economy, and international community that is designed to care for all the people and the entire planet. And it was interesting because when I was studying this, I found this other marvelous book on the economics of biodiversity, where the author said, biodiversity is the diversity of life. We'll find that the economics of biodiversity is the economics of the entire biosphere. What he's basically saying, indigenous people have been saying, which is that for you to live a good life and you have to manage your resources, and destroying them for short-term profit is not the answer. So stakeholder capitalism came out of Davos. It's a marvelous book. And because so many governments and large corporations have embraced it, what it's done is accelerated the whole ESG movement. And the ESG movement covers everything I've covered here. So I want to talk about environmental vice presidents. Economic theory tells you that you shouldn't spend money on anything that doesn't provide a profitable return. So when I started in the business, reclamation was always done at the end of the mine life. And in our models, we always assumed that whatever the reclamation costs were, they're equal to the salvage value of the steel and stuff that we could sell. Then somebody started cleaning up as they mined. And I remember very distinctly people say, boy, what a bunch of idiots. You know, you don't make any money reclaiming. Why wouldn't they leave it to the end so the time value of that investment is really small? And what happened is they found that it lowered their final reclamation cost because you're not letting whatever damage you're doing compound itself. And so there was actually an economic benefit to cleaning up as you went, which is smart business. And so they invented vice presidents of the environment. When I started, there were no vice presidents of environment, and now there are. And they were created to look for other opportunities like this where you can actually make money out of being a better environmental citizen. And today's VP, poor guy, also gets all the ESG programs to manage, which are getting quite extensive because we're early days in the ESG world. So there's still a lot of learning. There's going to be some false starts, and it's going to be increasingly more expensive. So the question is, will ESG be profitable like reclamation was? I think it definitely will be, particularly if we develop new technologies which are more cost effective than what we're currently doing. So again, here's a case where change can be really good, and change also creates opportunity. And you're going to see a lot of people make a lot of money by embracing all of this and being the leaders in the technology and bringing it forward. And by the way, you can be one of them if you want. So what's the impact on mining at the ESG? Well, the population continues to grow, so the demand continues to grow. Many metal price forecasts were suggesting higher metal prices before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, of course, we had mines shut down or delayed, which removed additional supplies from the market. So this exacerbated the shortfall, which is why you've seen the run up lately in metal prices. But there's not enough capital around to allow us to catch up. And during this, of course, because of the whole ESG movement, you're having investors changing their demographics. Some will no longer invest in coal. Goldman Sachs came out and said they will no longer invest in coal or any Arctic project. And you're getting other investors that are superimposing on their investment strategy these ESG type concepts. And you're seeing a lot of companies are now creating benchmarking systems to put metrics to your company to see how you're doing relative to the world and all that. But longer lead times are required for us to catch up because permitting is getting more extended time-wise. So you had a shortfall before the pandemic, you had an additional shortfall because of the pandemic. Permitting times are taking longer. So even if you have the money to build it, it's going to take you longer to get the permits to start construction. All of this is a marvelous case of supply-demand imbalance, which is going to result in higher prices. And curiously, when prices are high, that entices investors to invest. So we may see actually a resurgence in investors into the mining sector because of the sudden rise in metal prices, rather than because the world's decided we're all good citizens. And here's just an example. I pulled this from a presentation. This shows you the copper forecast. And the basic scenario, which is the orange is what the base case production, in other words, all the mines that are currently known, how they run themselves out. And of course, they don't do things like, you know, if we have a higher copper price, you can lower your cutoff and you get more metal out. This is just a base case. And then there's a number of projects that are on the drawing boards to be built, and they show the production on that. And no matter how you cut it, in about 3 or 4 years, we're going to have a shortfall in copper. And then the demand, which is the lines you see on there, shows you, the primary demand. If you use a historical growth rate, it shows you what the demand is going to be, or if you just throw a 2% growth rate, which is about average, what it's going to do. You notice that none of these things coincide. This tells us in the case of copper that we have a huge deficit problem coming very quickly. And the pandemic just speeded that up. That's why copper's at whatever, $4.50 a pound now, where most of the time it's around $2. We're going to see this in a number of different metals. Here's an interesting graph I got yesterday from Statista that the electric car sales doubled in 2021 over 2020. Now, I'm sure a few of you have been following this electric vehicle, the green economy. The green economy, where an electric car takes 7 times as much copper as a fossil fuel car. The green economy, where lithium batteries rule the day, even though lithium is sucking all the water out of all of the basins in Chile and Bolivia. This green economy thing's a bit of a scam, folks. We understand that we want to have a greener economy. I have no trouble with that. But the idea that if you're a lithium producer, you're a better environmental citizen than if you're, a nickel producer, it's just simply not true, because everything in mining disturbs the land. It's just a question of how you want to value who's doing the best or the worst of the land. But this increase, this doubling in 2021 is just the beginning. The idea in the world is that we're going to be up to 20 or 50 million vehicles that are going to be EV, and EV cars take a lot more metals than the traditional fossil fuels. So where are they going to get their metal supply from in a world that takes longer to permit, harder to raise capital for? Very interesting, but it really suggests that the long-term metal price cycle is going to be strong for many years to come. Here's another one. This is really fascinating. This was taken out of a webinar I was part of with the National Academy of Science last year. And this shows the annual demand increase for all of these technologies that we need. And so for, out to 2050. So for instance, graphite, we need 500% more graphite every year to get the world to the low footprint it's shooting for. And look at same thing with lithium, cobalt, indium. I mean, you go down through all the metals. We're not talking about needing 5 or 10% more. We're talking about needing hundreds of percent more. And there simply isn't enough supply in the world to do that. And the demand is only going to continue to grow. Again, a very strong argument that we're going to have a marvelous next 5 or 10 years, maybe even more in the metal prices. So here was another graph. This one was interesting, and I've been unable to get hold of the paper. But what this did is this was a paper that said, okay, how much do we need to spend to get us to a net zero emissions for the world? And the calculations that McKinsey came out with was we need to spend $9.2 trillion a year. Now, I want a piece of that action, at least on the receiving end, not on the spending end. But this graph was really interesting because it shows you the historic metal prices in black. And it shows you that if we go to a net zero emissions scenario, how much more metal is going to be needed. And then the blue line shows you the stated policies, which is normally about a 2% growth rate. But again, we're going to need a hell of a lot more metals to go to a net zero global economy. So where's the opportunity? Well, one is we need to find it. We need to develop it. But we're going to be fighting this battle uphill from the people who don't want us disturbing the land. So we're going to need to create new technologies. 30 years ago, Rio Tinto properly said the future of copper is an underground block cave. I think there's a lot to say for that. I think open pits are going to come under attack because they disturb so much. And part of the reason that people use open pit mines is because they can mine low grades. Well, under the new world order, low grades just means you have to move more tons, which is more wasteful. You have to use more emissions. That's bad. You have greater cycle times. That's bad. All the reasons we build low grade open pit mines there's going to be a big pushback on. But again, I've shown you 3 graphs from 3 independent sources here, none of which say that metal prices should be dropping or even plateauing. So for people starting a career in mining, you couldn't have picked a better time. You should never do market timing, but this one, you got it right, whether you like it or not. So I was reading some press releases this week, and I wanted to bring this one out. There is a company called Westvault Mining that has the Hasbrook gold mine in Nevada that they're getting ready to build. And they just did a big trade-off study. And they determined that using grid power was more environmentally and cost beneficial than using natural gas. And part of these studies are, like the people providing them the power are also trying to reduce their emissions. They're using electric vehicle instead of diesel vehicles. They're using electric power for drying kilns instead of diesels. And the upshot of all this is that they can reduce their emissions from 200,000 tons to 66,000 tons over the life of the mine. The mine has like a 7-year life. I mean, that's a substantial reduction in CO2. And these guys are using technologies that also exist. Just imagine if people put their heads together and try to figure out a way to make even better technologies. Also, they're taking a look at using electric secondary equipment, and they think they can wipe out another 23,000 tons over the mine's life. All of these actions, according to them, are going to lower their costs, especially because they can benefit from cap and trade and purchase carbon credits and do all that fun stuff. So here's the point is, this is using technology that already exists, but we are just at the cutting edge of developing even better technologies. And all of that is going to take a lot of smart people, a lot of engineers, and a lot of dollars. So what do you want to watch? Well, first thing is ESG costs are going to rise. Why? Because they're just now getting around to codify it. And with all these new metrics and the world kind of figuring out what does ESG really mean, it's going to be expensive for a while until it becomes part of our daily life. Supply chain delays are commonplace. Everybody thinks, well, once the pandemic's over, everything get back to normal. I don't think so. I think supply chains are now part of our lives. Just-in-time inventories, which were huge in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, where you never had a penny of working capital. You always had the supplier on call, and if you needed a drill bit, he'd fly it in the next day. Those days are long gone, folks. With the way the board shut down and all of the other issues related to the pandemic, just-in-time inventories aren't going to work. So again, I make the case earlier, I think 3D printing is on the rise. The technology has massively changed the world. And I mean, the idea that you could make a 3D drill bit on site at a remote place, that to me is like Jules Verne futuristic. But you're going to need to tie up a lot more working capital because you're not doing just in time. So discretionary spending is going to take a hit. Well, what is discretionary spending? Well, exploration is one area that has it. And philanthropic expenditures are another area. However, a lot of the ESG issues and things people are doing are considered, charitable or philanthropic. They're considered discretionary expenditures. You don't have to build that hospital in that remote village, but it sure does good things for you if you do. So some of this discretionary may not be as discretionary as people might think. And again, I'm heavily encouraging technology. I think technology, we really need some breakthroughs right now, and it could help a great deal. So in summary, we have macro societal changes are underway. The internet is accelerating these changes. And what it's doing is it's resetting the social fabric in such a way that individuals are now being heard and are able to organize. And that organization is leading to larger numbers. And that's what's causing a lot of the societal change. And the point I was trying to make is these changes are occurring very quickly, where historically they would take forever. Be a lot of false starts, a lot of ups and downs, but now we seem to have this ground surge on these issues. And with Davos supporting it as well, it just encourages it to accelerate even faster. Human population continues to grow. The need for metals continues to grow. This imbalance is huge and should continue for the next number of years. And in every case, it creates opportunity. And I couldn't think of a better time to be in the mining business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silver, for your presentations. Well, your perspectives about today volatile social and economic environment is essential in helping us to address our present, but also our future career. We have some minutes left for some questions. I am sure there's a lot about this provocative thoughts that Mr. Silver has shared with us. So if you agree, I can give you the space, each one who can unmute and
Sure.
ask the question directly to Mr. Silver. Does anybody have any question or comment?
I do. This is Steve Enders.
Yeah, okay.
I know it's a surprise, Doug. I disagree with you that exploration is a discretionary expenditure. It is definitely elastic, correct? We don't have to do it today, but we have to do it at some point in time. So absence a dramatic change in technology where we are no longer dealing with a probabilistic business, but a deterministic business, and we can just go get what we want, we cannot consider exploration as discretionary in the long run. I don't understand what you mean by it being discretionary.
Usually, if you look through history, Steve, when times are bad, they tend to whack exploration more than the other operating units in a company. I totally agree with you, but you and I are explorationists. I've never understood why companies don't spend more on exploration, because it wraps up their future unless they're strictly in the acquisition game. So I accept your comment. I don't believe it is either, but there's many CEOs who, as I've always said in the past, some CEOs view exploration as a necessary evil, and when times are bad, they remove the word necessary.
Yeah, so I get it. So it's essential for society, whether
Yes.
it's essential for a company or essential at a specific point in time. I guess it's discretionary, but society needs it as an investment.
Absolutely. I should have distinguished between those two. Yeah, society has no choice. We need it. We need some giant underground block cave porphyry coppers. That's what we should be focusing on in exploration. And but I agree with you. I agree with you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Doug, this is Corey. Another very good talk. I enjoy listening about ESG because obviously it's important. And I was born and raised in Butte, Montana, where a number of ESG issues occurred or not. So, but one of the things you brought up is the balance between what is deemed green and what is not, and particularly lithium production. And I know that you've spent some time on the financial side. So I would say this, one of the things I've noticed, and maybe you have or have not, is that there's a number of companies who have cloaked themselves in ESG or sustainability ventures that actually lack that, and they lack the aptitude to have a real investment vehicle for people. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, let me listen. I have seen recently, and I don't know what it is, any number of Australian exchange companies come in and buy or acquire, or in some manner take over properties in the United States that allege to have they're going to create these critical minerals and materials. And when you take a deep dive into where they're at and what they're going to do, there's nothing to it. Have you noticed this? It's weird.
Yeah. Well, yes, Corby. Of course, I see this every day, but let me qualify it for you. First of all, your share price doesn't go up and you don't raise money unless you're selling positive news. Right now, because ESG is it's not a new subject, but because it's being repackaged under new rules, people have a lot of latitude to say what they want, and you can't really prove them wrong. So of course they're going to do it. At the end of the day, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see all of these metrics and all these companies that are selling their consulting services on metrics. They're going to be consolidated, and the codification is going to be much more rigid, at which point then you can actually measure them against it. And I have to tell you, if you read the ESG reports for the mining companies, it's really quite amazing. I mean, one company, I was reading the report, and they're down to the point where they're asking their employees, are you taking the bus to work or are you driving?
Oh, okay.
And they're picking their office building by who has, LEED platinum status as opposed to LEED silver status.
Yeah.
Now, there are some people trying really hard to adapt quickly. But Corby, you and I have been business a long time. There's always a way to spin a good story, right?
Well, I just found it interesting that investment vehicles are cloaking themselves in ESG. But anyway, I'm not talking about the real mining companies. It seems like the fish are jumping on the hook right now. Anyway.
There is a bit of that going on. I mean, one of the things I should do is check how many lithium companies have been created in the last 3 years. That would be a good indication of jumping on the bandwagon.
Oh my
right?
God, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or graphite.
Yeah, or graphite, yeah. Other questions?
We have two comments. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to read two comments we have here in the chat from Mr. Bill Sich. He says that really helpful sharing of your study perspective. We as an industry should need to gain a better understanding on how to execute to meet these challenges. Jim Moranga has a question. He said that given the paradox between the need for minerals to become greener and the reduced appetite for investment, when do you see fresh investment coming soon? Example, technology companies, green technology producers?
Yeah. So if we're going to have a green economy, we should all be chasing copper oxides. That's a very simple answer. That was a mineralogy joke. Get over yourselves.
Oh God.
Okay.
So the green economy is going to develop in multiple places. I mean, Caterpillar and some of the big OEMs right now are throwing a lot of people at trying to develop trucks that have lower emissions and equipment that has lower emissions. So, some people are doing it very systematically. Other people, a lot of people are just following each other. So if somebody does something, then they'll mimic it. And what I found interesting is, I mean, I've been in many seminars and webinars over the last 3 years. Everybody talks about ESG. Everybody loves to talk about the metrics. But what they really need to do is somebody needs to put a conference on where people give examples like I did today. Switch from electric to or switch to electric from LNG, and here's how much you can save. And we just need a laundry list of people who've actually applied the ESG principles to their operations or to their corporation and share what you factually did so that other people can do it. With respect to technology, that's actually the easiest one because we know where the problems are. It's been well defined. CO2 is an obvious example. So now the question is, who's going to fund the research to fix it? And unfortunately, there's not a lot of big funds that finance just raw research. They want to see something commercial come out of it, or somebody has an idea that's already commercial and now needs, say, a pilot plant or something like that. And then they want to see cash flows and business plans and all that. But your bigger question is the same question that Steve and I and others have been fighting for 30 years, which is the beneficiaries of high metal prices are the mining companies. So what are the mining companies doing to increase the number of students and then increase the number of research projects at universities? They're giving money. Yes, some of them are extremely generous, but their future hinges more on the success of your academic institution than the other way around. And I have always been amazed that labor as an asset class is so ignored by the mining companies. They'll spend hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, on equipment, but not on labor. And all of this requires labor. So I think the answer is you're going to see a bunch of fits and starts. You're going to see, if you watch it carefully, kind of like the way I do, you'll see, like right now, there's a whole lot of companies that you can hire to give you metrics. And then they'll all fade and there'll be something better that will come out, and then something better and something better. But getting the money into the research, I think it's a big problem. And the governments don't have it because they're all overspending anyway. So I'm not sure where the research dollars or where getting more young minds working on this is going to come from. Steve, you got a feeling about that?
I think you're spot on that it's really about our ability to supply talent into the business to make it work is something that people really aren't paying attention to, right? It's actually more fundamental than actually having more discoveries and minds that we can continue to operate, because we need to have the people to do it. And so I think that you're spot on. And I think that companies are underestimating the demand required for students and professionals to enter the business. I actually think it's fundamentally underappreciated. So
Well, I remember.
I agree with you.
I remember years ago when Dick O'Brien was CEO of Newmont, he stood up at his annual meeting and said, we can only build one mine a year because we don't have enough qualified people. And it's like, well, there's an obvious answer, isn't there? Apparently not. Other questions?
Hello, Doug. This is Kadri Dagdalan. Barrick just announced this morning that they are going to buy back $1 billion worth of their stock. And you just show that the mining industry needs capital to explore, to increase their copper production, lithium production, and so on. What do you think about the mining companies buying back their stock?
So which company announced that?
Barrick.
Oh, Barrick did, yeah. Okay, so you've got two issues going on there. The first one is if they increase their dividend to their shareholders, the tax load for the shareholders is going to go up. So by buying the stock back, there's less shares out, so each share is worth more, but there's no tax consequence to the shareholder. So that's normally why people buy back. In theory, if they have that kind of money to buy back stock, it means they have excess capital to what they need. And so they're utilizing it to tighten up their capital structure. This is a continual battle, and I know that in Washington, as in some of the other countries, they're going after CEO pay and they're going after buybacks because they said, you know, we gave you all this stimulus during the pandemic, and what you did was use it for buybacks rather than creating new jobs and investing. It is a political hot potato, and I don't eat potatoes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Doug, I want to. I know time's getting late, so I want to sort of end with a comment, not a question. You know, you forecasted, you know, an increase in demand for metals and higher prices and the valuations of mining companies, and you also talked about the rate of change, right? In terms of things are happening faster all the time. On the 12th of February at 11:49 a.m. in the Financial Times, there was an article that says yield-hungry investors are rushing into mining stocks because of surging consumer prices, high dividends that are being offered, and expectations for cash returns. It's already happening.
There you go. Thank you. It validates my speech.
Okay, I just want to ask if there is a final question or final comment to close with this magnificent speech. If not, I want to thank you everyone and thank Mr. Silver again for presenting today. Excuse me, Dr. Shang, maybe have a question? Okay, so the seminar series take place every Wednesday at 4 p.m. We strive to bring you a qualified, interesting speaker series for all facets on the mining industry. You can find more information about the speaker series on the department website, mining.mines.edu, and on the department LinkedIn page. You can also view past seminars on our YouTube channel. Please follow us on LinkedIn for weekly updates on departmental activities, including the speaker series. Just as a reminder for the students, we are looking for the future leaders of our seminar for the coming year. So thank you so much again for your participation today, and I see you in the next week.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye,
great
everybody.
week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex.